Today I'm doing my second ever sewing project. For this project, it's the last piece in a costume that we were helping a friend make for an upcoming LARP, which is basically just an excuse to give us the social pressure to follow through on doing a thing, knowing that it was for someone else on a deadline. Yeah. You gotta use your tools where they come. The first two pieces were the hood and the chain of office, which were previous videos you can check out here. The hood I make in that video isn't the final version for the costume, but it is the same process. I just filmed making mine because it was the one that I would accept making mistakes on. For this costume, you can see that it has a lovely doublet, which is what we're going to be making today. Now, unlike the hood, I did look and find a pattern made by someone else. I know, don't be too proud of me, because I did decide to change it to fit the design better. Why settle when you can make your life infinitely more complex? I'll leave a link in the description to the original pattern, but unfortunately I can't really share my edited version because it's too similar and I don't want to pull people away from buying the original. That is something that they put a lot of time and expertise into. And I just kind of drew on mine. So I laid out the original pattern after cutting it out of paper and cut it out of muslin. I didn't really bother sewing together this version. Instead, I just roughly pinned it together and put it on a mannequin. That way I could see what it was doing when it was, together. From there, I was able to figure out what changes I wanted to make. But yeah, once it was on the mannequin, I was able to adjust and play and pin and cut and overall just figure out what I liked and what I wanted it to look like. So the character that we're making this for is themed around roses. And also he's going to have a magnificent cod piece that we want to make sure we highlight with the doublet. So I'm moving the front tabs back a bit so that they frame it better. And I'm changing the rest of the tabs to look a bit more like rose petals. I'm also, because some of the rest of his costuming pieces is more that kind of Landschneck style, I'm changing the sleeves to be less of like prim, like pointed doublet and more the poofy Landschneck top. He already has poofs, so I'm just gonna do more on top. Those sleeves, by the way, become the most annoying part of this project because I end up having to make 10 of them, 5 for each side, which means I have to make every single one of them twice. Then I have to do every single thing I do to them 10 times. Just, man, don't make that decision unless you're ready for it. The final change I'm making is I'm going to make the doublet around the ribs different fabric. I like the look of having seams there and the way it kind of creates shape, so I like to add that to a lot of my designs. I do now have to make it in real space, which is a new challenge. So I basically just draw what I think works, cut it out on one side, and use that to trace onto the other side so it looks kind of even. Not because I'm really using this to make the pattern, but because it lets me see what it will look like. I do the same to the front and the back. Once I'm happy with how it looks, I take all of my adjusted pieces and I lay it down on the muslin again and I cut out the new versions. This is the version that I'm gonna sew together to make sure that my adjustments make sense. I didn't bother to sew together the original one because it's a pattern I bought from someone. I assume it makes sense. But since this is my test version, I also marked out a lot of the patterns with the seam allowance and what they were, so that it's easier for you guys watching me put it together to know what's going on, and also it's easier for me to keep track of them. Because when you are sewing, everything gets everywhere and they all look the same. Before I went on to sew all that together after I cut it out of the muslin, I made sure to lay out another version of the original pattern without cutting it out. Instead, I lay down my clean versions and notate all the changes I made. This way, when I sew it together, I don't lose the changes and the actual measurements, and I don't have to take it apart just to figure out what my new pattern should be. Instead, I can take that home, cut the pages apart and scan it, and then clean it all up again in like Adobe Illustrator and print out a brand new pattern. That's all we need, is basically to do all this work and then look at the finished version like, cool, how do we make that out of like real fabric? Hi, I'm Maddie from the future. I'm still working on this, but I thought in the spirit of New Year's, I would chime in on some past mistakes so I can make a resolution to be better in the future and apologize to my past self. I've just about reached the point with the project that I do want to light it on fire, which I've heard is common for sewing projects. Luckily, I have today's sponsor, Fume, to distract me from those urges. Fume is a flavored air device that has little flavored cores inside here. You draw the air into your mouth and you get to taste the flavor of whatever you put in there. No nicotine, no batteries, no vapor, no nothing, just natural scent and flavor. And they also made it a fidget tool where it goes clicky clicky. It's got a chewy mouth bit and it's nice and weighty. Fume is also doing something for the New Year's, which makes sense considering it's such a good device to break bad habits. For January only, every core you order gets doubled. Order a pack, you get 2. Order 3, you get 6. You can math, but it's only for January. So make sure to order it before the end of January. Jump on that. Years pass fast. I'm still in 2003. I don't know where time's gone. The current flavor keeping me sane is crisp mint. It's my little smelling salts. It wakes me up after my brain goes dead after sewing for 3 days straight. To claim these double cores, use our code SKILLTREE, and if you get a journey pack with it, you get a free one of these rubber toppers for those people who like to chew on things. So head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use the code SKILLTREE, all one word, or use this QR code, or check out the link in the description. Now, if you don't mind, I've got a project to finish and some more mistakes for future me to deal with. Don't worry, future me. I'm sure you'll resolve to be better. Maybe I should make a resolution to look up things before I do them. Nah, that's less fun. So, on to test sewing it together. This is probably the part that I'll try to describe as much as I can, because when I get to the real thing, it's gonna be black on black on black, so it's gonna be difficult for me to catch footage of what I'm doing. Because I do the same things, just more for that one, because it's like more layers and you know. So the first thing I did is I sewed the sides back on. When I made the patterns for those ones, it's basically just I cut the pattern and then I added the seam allowance to both sides when I made the new version so that they overlap and then make the original shape again, if that makes sense. You'll see it, I hope. I'm not as good at catching things on film. Sometimes I think I do and then I go back to edit it and it does not come out well. So if I do that for this one, I'm sorry. I'm pretty sure already that a lot of the shots have just like half of it is my hair, but there is no other footage of it, so you live with it. So I sew on the sides, and this is where I stumble into the problem of curves again. Last time when I sewed the hood, I had a lot of difficulty pinning curves together without kind of always ending up uneven on one side. For this one, because I'm cutting the curve of the ribs, and then also the collar is a much more drastic curve, that's much more pronounced, and it was a struggle. I did find a new trick to be able to pin basically anything that's on a curve pretty perfectly. And also it tells you if your curve isn't the same as the piece that you're putting it together, because it won't work. And that's when later on I figure out that I sewed something wrong and it's no longer even. If you take any points of fabric when you are sewing, typically you only really need to care about the specific point that you're working on. The rest of the fabric can just kind of do what it wants. But as long as the point that you're working on is lined up, it comes out okay. That's what sewing is. Only the point that is under the needle really matters. It doesn't matter if the rest of your sewing is just a mess off to the side, as long as the fabric right around where you're sewing is lined up. So if you make sure that when you pin the edges together, the edges of the fabric are lined up, and it is kind of like lined up with itself only in that specific point. You pin it, then you go to the other side and you do the same. Now you have 2 points that you know are correct. From there, you can bend the fabric in half, putting those 2 points together, making sure that where you're putting them together is where the pin is actually holding the fabric, where it's gone in or out of the fabric. Then you can pull the fabric together, lining it up. A lot of times when you do this the first time, it won't line up evenly. It only matters at the very end. Remember, you only need 1 point to be correct. The rest of it can do whatever it wants. So you pull it taut until you get where those 2 fabrics line up. You make sure, you kind of shuffle them to make sure that they're lining up vertically, and you fold it. You push a pin through that fold and you pull it apart, ta-da! You have a perfect pin. You can do that over and over again between 2 points on curves, and you will always find that perfect middle where it is exactly where it needs to be. No matter how drastic or how kind of straight the fabric is, it gives you perfect points, and then you just take smaller and smaller folds as you develop more of the fabric. So like you take those 2 points you just made, then you take the middle and an end and you fold it in half. Then you take that the middle point between the middle and the end, and you fold it in half until you have a fabric that is basically keeping itself straight between those points. I also learned that pinning vertically is superior. My trick only really works horizontally, but I found that I could go in afterward and just like pin vertically through the middle of where I've pinned horizontally. But vertical pinning is so much easier. You'll see it happen a lot as I go on. So much easier. Okay, so now that we know how to pin together curves, a lot of this project is really simple. It's literally just pin together sides, sew sides, pin together other sides, sew other sides. So I did that for the sides on the front, sides on the back. This feels like a song. Then I sewed the shoulders together. Then I used my trick to pin the collar on, which is where it is the most useful because that's a very dramatic curve. For each one, I literally just lined it up with the little mark on the sewing machine that said my seam allowance, which was I think 3/8. And I sewed it along, pulling out the pins as I went. I made sure that there was enough pins that it was always held taut. So maybe sometimes a little bit too much pins, but you can never pin it too much. It just slows down the sewing, but it's perfect by the end of it. And you sew all the things that you pin together, and by the end of it, you have a thing. Honestly, I think the most difficult part for all of that was just figuring out how to make sure that the pins line up correctly. And then once I had the trick of vertical pinning, where the pins were no longer getting in the way while I was sewing and I could easily pull them out, man, like the whole thing just kind of happened. I'm finding that a lot of sewing isn't that complicated. It just takes a while. And a lot of it is the prep work. Once you get to the actual sewing, it goes fast, but you can't skip the prep work. At the end of it, I look back on the project and I can't think of anything that felt complex or difficult. It all just felt like it took a long time. I did just pin on the sleeves because I got lazy by that point and I was like, they're fine. And then I never even went back and checked where I pinned them on, so the final product has them a little bit far back. But then I laid out the tabs and figured out where I wanted them to fall and pinned them on. But once I had sewn together everything enough that I liked the way it looked, it did tell me that my pattern worked the way that I wanted to, and now I have practice in sewing it together. So with my new pattern, which I have taken home, scanned, cleaned up, and reprinted out, I start cutting out the lining, which is this nice gray linen. It's the same one that I got for the hood. I got these 2 different types of satin, one of which is this like really like gorgeous, like buttery, silky satin. It does hate me every single second of its existence though, when I try to sew it or just even look at it wrong. And then I got a slightly less hateful satin that has this rose pattern on it. So another trick that I learned while cutting stuff out, partially because my fabric was so hateful, is when I was pinning stuff out, it really helped to kind of clip or pin wherever the fabric may pull when you're cutting it. And that's mainly so that the bottom layer, because normally you fold fabric in half, to cut it doesn't get unaligned. Because you only mark the top, then you cut it all out, and then you get 2 different pieces, and they're 2 different shapes, and you already cut out and used most of your fabric, and it sucks. But if you make sure to kind of figure out where things may try to pull and get unaligned, and put clips beforehand, before you start cutting, they come out perfect. Maddie from the future here. That back panel I just cut out was wrong. Yep, I put the cut on the fold on the wrong side. So I'm gonna have to deal with that later. It's supposed to be down the long side, put it at the top. Don't know why I did it. Sorry, past me. For the hateful satin, I took the extra step of I pinned everything. Every breath I took, that satin was trying to move. I regret none of those pins. If anything, there should be more of them. I took all of the kind of accoutrement of the doublet, which is like the collar, the sleeves, the tabs, and I laid them all out. Then I took this interfacing that you can iron on. It has adhesive on one side, and I ironed it onto the linen part of all of it. It's a thin interfacing, so it's not super stiff, but it does give it a little bit more structure for these parts that are supposed to be more shaped. So like the collar, the sleeves that poof out, the tabs that kind of sit down. So while they're inside out, I iron on the interfacing on the inside of the linen. Remember, everything in sewing is done on the inside of things, not the outside, because we're gonna flip it inside out and then it's gonna look clean and pretty and like it's magic and you can't see where anything connects. But the inside's a mess, like all of us. So I ironed on the interfacing to all of the sleeves and all of the tabs and the collar. So many sleeves. Don't do sleeves this way. It's so many. Then I went through and just kind of sewed all the edges together, leaving specifically one side that I can turn them inside out. Once they were all sewn together, I did flip them inside out and iron them flat so the seams would lay cleanly against each other. Some of the sleeves I did get frustrated, and having done it so many times that I might have left them a bit messy. But we don't mention the mistakes. It's perfect the way it is. But once they were ironed flat, because none of these are supposed to be kind of poofed in themselves, it looks kind of unfinished that way, I went through and top stitched everything, which finishes the seam on the inside and also makes sure that it holds its shape specifically the way that you ironed it. That's pretty much all of the prep that you need to do for the tabs, the sleeves, and the collar.
Maddie from the future here. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but I am leaving most of my seams undone about the seam allowance from the edge. Don't do that. Turns out, sucks. And makes all of your other seams messy because they don't combine neatly. Don't do it. Sorry, past me.
What's left is sewing the sides onto both the lining and the fabric layer, which you sew onto the back and the front. There is one of the lining layers that I sew on backwards twice in 2 different ways. I sewed it on the wrong side the first time, and then I sewed it upside down the second time. Yeah, just like the test piece that we made out of muslin, we sewed the sides together, then we sewed the shoulders together. Remember, everything's on the inside, not the outside. Don't make my mistakes with that one side, which gives us basically 2 different versions of the same thing. Now that I have everything that I need to sew it together, it's time to make it more complicated. So I have all these decorations that I got that I decided that I was gonna add to it. I don't end up adding all of it, but I do end up adding enough to make my life difficult, especially this piping. Because you know what's not easy? Sewing with the chunky piping either getting in the way or having to go over that and the sewing machine hating you. Don't do it, or do it like in a different way. I don't know. I also sewed this kind of petally lace up the sides to add more structure to where the 2 different satins transition to each other, and also because it looks nice. Then I pinned together everything, so many pins. So the first thing I did is I took the fashion layer and I pinned the tabs on, I pinned the collar on, I pinned the sleeves on. That is so much things. The sleeves were so difficult that I ended up just sewing them together in one like bulk pass and then just pinning them onto the thing as an item, which ended up being super fun to sew through later. It's like 15 layers of fabric at the thickest. But once I had decided where everything went and pinned them all painfully, literally painfully, when you have like 4 layers of pins, there is so much stabbing going on. I then took the lining, laid it over the top so that the nice layers face each other and the tabs were in. This is important. Make sure the tabs are in on all the stuff. You don't want them hanging out when you sew it, or they will be on the inside of the fabric. And I pinned that to everything. This is our hiding the mess part of sewing, where we're going to sew the lining onto the fashion layer in a way that makes it so everything is connected on the inside, but you can't see it. This is also the stage where I want to light it on fire. I have been sewing straight for 3 to 4 days now. It's so beautiful. I love it. I do want to light it on fire. But once it is all pinned, then all I have to do is sew the length of it all around, except for the seams on the inside, because I decided that I wanted to leave those open. I probably should have just sewn those 2 and then just left like a small gap that I could pull everything through, as long as it's kind of like the width of your hand and you can reach into the thing and just like smush and pull everything through. You really, I'm finding, shouldn't leave that big of a gap to have to change things around. For me, it worked out because I had to fix a lot of stuff, so I was like pulling it in and out constantly, but it did make that seam also the messiest. You know, we live and we learn. So I sewed along the edge of everything. It was pretty simple, but sewing through the things like the piping and especially the sleeves, oh my God, like the 15 layers of fabric and the piping, my sewing machine hated me. But it gets us to the point where we have a thing. Once we turn it inside out, the only thing that makes it not a done thing is closures and that middle seam. So I ironed it flat, made sure that it was what I wanted. I noticed that in this one corner, when I had sewn the edge, I had managed to accidentally catch a little bit of one of the tabs. So I had to pull it back inside out so I could cut that thread and release the tab from its imprisonment. While I had it outside out, inside out, I also decided to put some interfacing along the edges, because that's where I'm gonna have either like buttons or like ties, because the sides are gonna be kind of like a corset lacing. And I wanna make sure that especially that satin that hates everything isn't getting a lot of like pull on it without some sort of structure. Or else it'll just like disintegrate or something. I don't know what lengths that satin is willing to go through for its hate. I made sure to not touch that satin directly with the iron, because even on the lowest setting, it still slightly changed color whenever the iron touched it directly, which I assume was just more hatred. And then before I turned it back right side out, I went back in with some seam glue and just kind of poked at everything with seam glue, because the little bookbinder in me won, and glue is always welcome, especially when you're new to sewing and you don't trust that all of these seams are going to stay together. So I just kind of poked at where seams met seams in the hopes that it'll stay together a little bit better. But once I was done, I was able to just turn it right side out, and get ready to finish the seams. I did this with this bias tape, which I folded over the sides and then struggled to figure out how to make them match up as I sewed them onto the seams. I eventually kind of remembered seeing different seams that have them like cut in diagonal, so I did that. I'm pretty sure it's not how you do it. I think you're supposed to like fold it in on itself and then have them match up, because it still left a raw edge. So I just went through with like a zigzag. I was so tired at this point, okay? But I did the edges where there was ever going to be any closures, and then I closed the front seam with the bias tape. Basically anywhere that I wanted there to be extra structure, especially that where the satin of hate is, because it's so floppy, and then wherever there was still a seam that needed to be covered. Once I had the bias tape sewn onto everything, I took these grommets that I had gotten for an older project, basically like a LARP costume that wasn't me making a thing from scratch. It was just me taking like old clothes and making them look medieval. But I marked out where I wanted the lacing to go, which I ended up going for about 1.5 inches of distance between them, and I laid out grommets on both sides. These grommets have this silicone disc that I put specifically where it is in contact with the satin of hate, because I hoped that it would add some buffer against that fragile fabric and any like rubbing against like a harsher metal surface. If I used those wrongs, let me know. I bought them forever ago, so I just kind of assumed that was what the silicone part was for. I then found some random black cord, which I think is paracord, in Kit's crafting supplies, and used that to lace it up and test it. Once I liked the way that it looked, I settled down to finish it off with some beautiful rose, like gunmetal looking buttons. Only 3 hours later, still no buttonholes. Okay, halfway through this project, I was using Kit's sewing machine and it just broke. Like it just started going backwards for no reason. The little backward toggle, it wasn't that. It didn't like me anymore. So I brought my sewing machine and did the rest on that. None of the sewing machines that we had would do a buttonhole. I tested it for 3 hours and could not get anything to work. So at this point, I'm terrified of messing it up. It is for someone else. So I'm gonna send the buttons to him, as well as like the grommets and anything that'll help him decide how he wants to add closure. But I don't get closure. But yeah, here it is. I'd put it on, but I'd have to relace it because his arms don't bend enough to take it off. But we'll take some footage of it. There's all the markings that will eventually wipe away of the chalk of me desperately trying to put buttons on. But as I was making this, it is genuinely so nice. And none of it was complex. Like it was long and frustrating at times. And I think the biggest issues I had were like the sewing machine not working the way that I expect it to. But sewing, I'm finding, isn't that hard. It's just a lot of patience of taking the time to actually set stuff up, and then having some tricks and tools of like how to line up edges on curves correctly. That once you have that knowledge, I look at a lot of patterns now that look complex and I'm like, I could probably do that. And I've only made 2 things. Just remember, I am new to things, so everything that you see me do, you can definitely do, especially since I had to do it in like 4 days while also filming it. So anything I can do, you can probably do better. So next time you're thinking about making a thing that looks actually really nice for any of your costumes, or even just like day-to-day clothing, it's not actually that hard once you have a few projects under your belt enough to understand how to think about sewing. And a lot of the materials and everything are so commonly available that it really does open up just so many doors of what I could consider myself making. I've definitely tipped into the I feel like I'm confident enough in this skill that I'm getting a bit too excited about the potential things I could make. So yeah, speaking of going and making other things, I'm gonna go do that. Probably edit this video and see all the footage that's another skill I need to level up, is filming stuff better. But as always, if you like the video, give us a like or a thumbs up or whatever YouTube thing. I don't have the same muscle memory. Let me know if you guys like me doing videos, or if you like me doing sewing, or if you like my style of kind of being a bit more chaotic and not looking stuff up, or if I should look stuff up more. If you know what you are doing, leave me comments in the description correcting the things that I did wrong, so that I can learn, because I'm more likely to read those than actual instructions. And in the meantime, keep leveling up, you. You made it to the end screen. And yes, I remembered to make one this time. YouTube loves it when you get to the end of a video all the way to the end screen. By watching all the way to the end, you have told the YouTube overlords that we liked our video and we should continue to make them. Another great way to support the channel is by joining these people's noble ranks. These are our Patreon members, and they are genuinely the only thing that keeps us going most days. Emotionally. Sometimes when you're 4 days deep into a sewing project, knowing that there are people out there who care enough about what we do to support us does keep you going. And as always, a special shout out to our Grandmaster tier patrons who give an amazing amount of support. If you want to join our Patreon, check out the links in the description below. Especially as we're moving toward finally having the office at the beginning of February, we'll be able to put out a lot more content for you guys. And we all know that I'm gonna have a lot more bloopers than Clever did. Have you met me? Otherwise, you can check out these videos here, and YouTube likes that too. Go forth, level up, learn. See the other things that we have spent too much time on and slowly gone insane. Speaking of, I should probably go outside. I hear there's this thing called sunlight somewhere, somehow.